CIS presentation on my major, Body, Mind, Wholeness Through Movement. Tonight I'll be telling you about my major, and this is going to be my presentation. So, I created this major because I plan on going to grad school to become a dance therapist. I crafted my courses based on the requirements grad schools for dance therapy have. So it's a lot of psychology classes, dance classes, anatomy, wellness-based classes. Along with my CIS major, I am also a dance major. So I had to do a capstone project for that major. And for that, I created a piece based on Freud's theory of the id ego and superego. And I decided that I wanted to connect both of my major capstone projects. So for this one, I kind of combined that with the more contemporary aspects of dance movement therapy. So my goal for my senior year was to learn more about the history of dance therapy and the psychological aspects that are involved in it. So for, like I said, for my senior one, I choreographed the id ego and superego piece based on Freud. And I was using that as an example of the history of dance movement therapy. And then I took my research down a more modern thought of psychotherapy and dance movement therapy to create this presentation for you. To start my presentation out, I will be having you, the audience, participate in a movement practice. Then I will move on to discuss a little bit about the history of dance movement therapy, and show you the video of the piece that I created on Freud's theory of the id, ego, and superego. Finally, I'll discuss more of the contemporary aspects of dance movement therapy and have my dancers perform a reworked version of the piece using the newer aspects. All right, we will now be doing an authentic movement practice. For this, you will have your eyes closed and will move in any way you feel is right. The idea is to move without judgment, as you are now in this time. I will turn on some music and call out some ideas as you go, so you can feel free to either ignore them or use them, or if I say something that you really like and you want to just stick with that for a while, go ahead and do that. But pay attention how you feel now and how these different movements change how you feel. Be you and be free. So please stand up and find a spot somewhere within the space where you have enough room to move. If you don't want to participate, you don't have to. If you're not able to, that's fine as well.
Or should we just leave it?
Stay away from the site. All right, does everybody have a good spot where you're comfortable? Yes. Okay, go ahead and close your eyes and I'll get started. All right, begin with your eyes closed and just notice your breath. How fast or how slow is your breath? How deep in your stomach do you breathe? Now begin to explore moving your head. How heavy is it? How does it rotate around your spine? Try moving the different joints in your body. The smaller ones, your fingers and toes, your elbows and knees, the can you find to move these joints? If you've been on the floor, maybe try standing. If you've been standing, maybe try being on the floor. How can you move your spine? How fluid or rigid can you make it? Can you feel each vertebrae move? Explore your feet and hands. What do these different surfaces feel like? How can you scrunch and expand these body parts? Bringing your explorations to a close, go back to your breathing. Has your breathing changed at all? All right, open your eyes and let's talk. Move back to your seats. Okay, does anybody have any comments on what you felt? Relaxed. Anyone else? Sleepy.
Curious.
Curious. Any others? Aware.
Invigorated.
Invigorated.
Exploratory.
Exploratory. Good. Release. Yeah. What about your breathing? That change at all? All right, we can move on. Thanks for doing that, guys. All right, so it's important to understand a little bit about the history of dance movement therapy to appreciate my project. So I'll be talking about three men who are very important in the history of dance movement therapy. So Freud was an Austrian. He was born in 1856 and died in 1939. He was the founder of psychoanalysis, the theories and techniques used to treat psychological disorders. But he began as a doctor where he became interested in the unconscious mind. He believed that underneath our conscious minds are primitive biological impulses that clash with the needs of society and morality. According to Freud, these conflicts are responsible for our human behavior as well as the unexplainable physical symptoms his patients suffered from. Freud used his technique of free associations to study the unconscious mind. Free association is when your patient says anything that comes to mind without trying to make logical or meaningful statements. Freud would then interpret his patients' associations, believing that free associations revealed the processes and operations of the unconscious mind. He would do a similar process with his patients' dreams. These free associations are similar to what we did just now with authentic movement. You moved without trying to make logical or meaningful movements, and in dance movement therapy, the therapist would be watching these movements and interpreting them. Critics of Freud believed that he saw people as foolish, weak, and self-deluded, and focused too much on the sex drive. Jung was a Swiss psychologist. He was born in 1874 and died in 1961. Jung began as a follower of Freud and was believed to have been the heir to Freud's throne. He was also interested in the unconscious mind and dreams, but not with Freud's obsessions over the sex drive. Jung believed that the unconscious mind was not just one person's unique life experiences, but was also filled with universal psychological truths shared by the whole human race. He called this the collective unconscious. He believed that humans are given a collective unconscious from which myths, fairy tales, and other archetypes arise. He thought of it as an inherited storehouse of unconscious ideas and forces common to all human beings. Jung thought that sex and aggression were powerful motives, but he also thought that people have an instinctive need to create and self-actualize. He believed we were all predisposed to appreciate and intuitively understand myths, art forms, and symbols. His ideas were a major influence in what we just did, authentic movement, which is frequently used in dance therapy. Rudolf Laban was born in Hungary in 1879 and died in 1958. He is known as the father of European modern dance, brought the worlds of performing arts and science together, and created Laban notation, a language for describing human movement. Dance movement therapists use a system of movement observation to understand the body language of their clients, and a lot of this is based on Laban's work. He focuses on three areas: the body, effort, and space shape. Laban notation uses the kinesphere to describe how much space a person takes up. A confident person will have a large kinesphere, while a more timid person would have a smaller kinesphere. These are things that a dance therapist can notice and work with during sessions. Relying heavily on the work of Freud, Jung, and Laban, the American Dance Therapy Association began in 1966. The Dance Therapy Association, or ADTA's mission statement, is as follows. The purpose of the ADTA is to establish, maintain, and support the highest standards of professional identity and competence among dance movement therapists by promoting education, training, practice, and research. The association provides avenues of communication among dance movement therapists and those working in related fields, and increases public awareness of dance movement therapy. Marion Chase was the first president of dance movement therapy, of ADTA. Before she became president, she was a dancer and teacher for the Denishon Company in the 20s and 30s. During this, she became interested in why people wanted to take dance classes but not perform. She eventually shifted the focus of her classes to the person dancing rather than the dance technique. Physicians and psychologists took notice of this and began sending their patients to her classes. In 1942, Chase began working at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. as a teacher for dance for communication, which later became known as dance movement therapy. She became the first full-time dance movement therapist in 1947. From 1966 to 1968, she served as the first president of ADTA. One of the most important ideas that Chase offered the dance movement therapy world is that tensions and distortions of the body reflect traumatic experiences. It's interesting to note that psychology developed separately in Europe and was brought over to the US, but it seems that dance movement therapy developed separately both in the US and in Europe. The European Association of Dance Movement Therapy was not even started until 1994. Now I will show the video of the piece that I created last semester for my dance major capstone. This is a piece that I created based on Freud's theory of the id, ego, and superego. For Freud, the id, ego, and superego are primitive biological urges that are in conflict with each other and what society expects of us. The id is our impulsive, primitive self, the ego, the part that tries to please society, and the superego is the balancer of the other two parts. Each of my dancers represents one of these aspects, so as you watch, notice their movements and how their personalities kind of fit. Can you hear it? All right, so we can take some time to kind of talk a little bit about what I've taught you so far. Answering questions about the piece. The piece was set up so that there was only light within like a box area, so that's why it was kind of dark and hard to see things. So the idea was that the dancers weren't able to get out of that small area. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about your choreographic process, combining theories of psych and transferring that to movement?
Sure, yeah. So I started this piece by taking Freud's theory of the id-ego and superego. So I did a little research on that, kind of looking at like the personalities that each of those aspects kind of has. And so I wrote down those different characteristics and gave them to my three dancers. I have two of them here with me today. But then I also took those for myself and kind of interpreted them into movement. But then I did something different where I wrote down my movements, and instead of showing them to my dancers, I gave them written down to my dancers to interpret themselves. So a lot of this piece was those movements that my dancers took for themselves and interpreted, and then we kind of worked it into some section kind of stuff. Yeah.
So with that format, how did like cleaning or editing the piece work if it was the dancer's interpretation? Could you really clean that with your interpretation, or would that take it away?
Kind of. The cleaning was more like, does that look good kind of stuff. So it was kind of, yeah, kind of took over, the choreography part kind of took over for that. Yeah.
How did you write down the movements? Did you use the language you showed us earlier?
No, I did not. I used a language called "What is this move in my head?" Connor, one of my dancers, is really good at interpreting my movements now. One of them was called the booty pop, and she just had to come up with whatever that meant. Yeah. Anything else? It can be about the history or whatever. Okay, we can move on then.
I have one question.
Oh, yeah.
It seems as if in interpreting all this, there are layers of Freud involved. There are the dancer's movements and your interpretation of those movements.
Mm-hmm.
How did you reconcile all of that in terms of what was super ego and what's ego and so
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess I kind of just movements that represented those characteristics to me. So one dancer did a lot of like things that came together into the center. So she was the one, the super ego, who was the controller of the two, or the ego, super ego. It gets confusing. So something like that, or the id did a lot of the more primitive movements. So that was more like animalistic kind of in my head, so it was more on the ground, more down kind of stuff. Yeah. Cool. All right. So now we'll move on to the influences of today's dance movement therapy. The American Dance Therapy Association defines dance movement therapy as the psychotherapeutic use of movement to further emotions, cognitive, physical, and social integration of the individual. So now I have a video by a dance therapist named Susan McKenna, and she's kind of giving her own definition of dance movement therapy.
Hi, Billy. Now, I left them up in the air. They have no idea what you do. What do you do?
I'm a dance therapist.
A dance therapist. Now, what does that mean?
Well, dance therapy is a way of using dance and movement to help people express how they're feeling. And basically it depends on who you're working with. For instance, if you work with a psychiatric population, people who have emotional disturbances, then you will be using dance and movement to help them to work out the problems, to express how they're feeling, to have them develop a fuller range of movement, which helps them to be healthier.
Aha. Well, then, if you sort of draw them out through dance therapy, then that helps the psychiatrist to work with them or help diagnose or define what their problems are in a way?
Well, actually, I am a dance therapist that works with psychiatric patients. Dance therapists can work with a variety of different populations. When I work as a dance therapist in a psychiatric institute, I would say more that I'm a member of a team, so that I'm not necessarily, although it helps, all of our work helps each other, more than that we're helping the patient to get better. So that I feel like the use of dance and movement in the therapy with the patient is more to help them become more aware of themselves, to be able to express themselves more fully, and to be able to expand their range of possibilities, both in movement and behavior, and also in the amount of things and the way they're able to.
That was the end. She just kind of goes on and on for a while. Okay, so dance therapy is used in mental health, rehabilitation, medical, educational, and forensic settings, and in nursing homes, daycare centers, disease prevention, health promotion programs, and in private practice. It is used in individual, couple, family, and group therapy formats. It is helpful for people with a variety of different medical, developmental, all ages, physical, and psychological impairments. It can be used for people of all ages, races, and ethnic backgrounds. Dance movement therapy has been shown to improve psychological and physical impairments that can be broken into 5 categories: resocialization and integration within a larger group system, nonverbal creative expression for emotional expression, total self and body awareness and enhanced self-esteem, muscular coordination, broader movement capabilities and tension release, and enjoyment through relaxation. And now I have another video clip of Susan McKenna where she kind of describes a client with depression and how people with depression tend to move.
When they've been standing around saying that they're depressed or tired or angry or whatever and don't want to move.
What does it mean when someone's depressed?
Well, I guess clinically, but simply, I would say that depression usually has to do with not wanting to feel feelings. So that there could be a number of feelings. Often it's anger. People don't want to feel anger, so instead they feel depressed. Or they don't want to feel sad, so instead they feel depressed.
They don't want to feel rejection.
There are a lot of things that people don't want to feel and aren't very comfortable. Now, I want to say that's simplifying it a lot. But in terms of really looking at it, on a movement level as well, you can use that as a way of seeing how depressed people might move if they weren't depressed. And I think what I would say then is if you're not feeling anything at all, it's very likely that you will move with very little energy in your body. You probably won't seem to have much of a sense of your torso. You may not move very much at all. You probably seem to be pretty weighted and leaden and may move very slowly, but without a lot of lightness or lyrical quality. And often the feelings that are underneath that are not that lightness that's missing, but the real strength or anger, fury that could be underneath that. So that might be a range of the sort of movement I would see in a session when people begin to move out of their depression. There are a lot of other movements that I'll see that weren't there before they were able to sort of release from them.
Is it true that emotionally disturbed people have a very narrow range of movement? They may have one kind of movement that they do either like that or nothing, and that they don't have a broad range of movement.
Well, I think that in general, disturbed people have a limited range of movement. I would agree with that. But it's not necessarily the same range of movement. So that with adolescents, they might be acting out when they're depressed. And so that you would see somebody who is not willing to move with steadiness, is not willing to move directly, but always seems to be bouncing off the walls. That's a particular limitation. Obviously there are movements that they aren't willing to experience.
Well, do you try to increase the range of movement?
Basically, that's the goal. That's the movement goal on the session. Because dance therapy is founded on the idea that if people are able to move in a fuller range of motion, they're able to feel more things, they're able to express themselves in different ways, they have more options available to them in the way they behave, the way they interact with others, and the way they feel. So basically, a fuller range of movement means a healthier person.
Yeah. Now, do you work in a circle, or how do you...
Classic dance therapy begins in a circle, and I find that it...
We'll get to that later, right?
So the therapy process includes 4 stages. The first is called preparation. It's the warm-up stage where formal assessment is given if needed. Information about dance movement therapy is given to the client. The personal history of the client is learned. A risk assessment is done if it has not been done already. A movement profile is set up where the therapist learns the client's normal posture and body language and how they normally move. And its establishment of a safe and therapeutic relationship. So I am now going to ask my sister Elayna to come up. She doesn't really know what's going to happen, but I'm going to try to do kind of an example of what a movement profile would be with her. So this book that I have, it's called Dance Movement Therapy, has like the outline for doing a movement assessment. So we'll just kind of go through and do a couple examples of what that would be. So it's got like a key, so it has like different categories. It's got body attitude. So, oh, thanks. So we have things, so stand like you normally stand. Yeah, please stand. So there could be things like having a sunken posture, so she maybe have like shoulders that way or something. She's kind of got a naturally upright posture though, so I would take and check off naturally upright posture. And then it's got things like when you walk, left, right, split. So you walk for me. Go up that way. All right, she kind of walks normally too. So she's got contralaterally in her walk, so contralateral. It's pretty normal. So then there are other things like use of space and shaping. So that could be, like I mentioned before, kinesphere stuff. So do something really big. Yeah. Okay, so something like that could be a large kinesphere. I'll do something where you're kind of like. Now she's got kind of a small kinesphere. So it's got kind of that sort of checklist thing. Efforts used do you have like strong force or light force? Pretend to punch somebody. Not me. Okay, that was kind of light force. But yeah, so that's kind of what you would do for like a movement profile, just kind of understand your client's normal habits. Okay, you can sit down now. All right, so then incubation is the middle section where relaxation, letting go of conscious control, and more risk-taking is done. The movements become symbolic, and this is when painful or embarrassing emotions emerge. This is where most of the therapeutic techniques would be used. Illumination is the third stage. It is when the meanings of the movements are interpreted and realized. And finally, evaluation is the last stage, when the significance of the process is discussed and the therapy process closes. And then I have one more video clip of Susan McKenna, and I promise I'm done with her. So this is her describing the therapy process.
Okay, well, let me just lay a framework first, that in a dance therapy session, basically, the idea is to get people warmed up and moving together, and then out of that, it's improvisational, so that out of however people are feeling in the movement that they're doing, generally a theme will develop. And the theme might be things that people will share in. And then at the very end, there's a sense, it's very important to bring a sense of closure. So the movement will reflect that. The more intense movement will probably be during the middle of the session, and then with closure being brought on by maybe softer, slower, more contained movement. So I guess one example that I can give is, it was more than just a closure of a session, it was the last session for a patient that had been in the group for quite a while. And sometimes we work with props in the groups that I work with. The prop that we were working with this time was a parachute. And she requested that we let her stand on top of the parachute in the middle of the parachute. And she had this idea in her mind. She wanted all of us to stand around the parachute holding onto the edge. This girl was very tall, very slender, and very disturbed. She had a lot of problems, a very difficult childhood, and was going on to another locked unit, another hospital, so that she was having a really hard time relating to other people. What she asked us to do was to raise the parachute up and to wrap her in it. At that point, I sort of took control at directing people because she wasn't sure how to
So
tell people to
parachute
do it.
is very soft silk or nylon that just floats.
It's usually in a circle, a circular,
Right.
and this is quite a large one. It fills our whole room. So as we lifted it up, we all began to walk slowly around in a circle, and the music that was on was very soft. It was almost as if we were marching slowly. Slowly, and she stood very still in the center. And everybody held onto their bit of parachute until slowly, after maybe 3 or 4 revolutions, she was completely wrapped up to her neck with people just holding onto the bits of parachute. She was like she was in a cocoon.
Right.
And in fact, that's what I said. It looks like you're in a cocoon. Shall we unwrap you and see if you come out like a butterfly? And so everybody started walking the other direction very slowly, marching with the parachute. And as we unwrapped her, I said, well, what do you think you'd like to be when you step out of your cocoon? And she thought for a minute, and we were still unwrapping, and she said, I want to be a real person. And at that point,
Now we're done. Okay, so somatics is a field that is full of many different perspectives. The definition for somatics varies according to who is giving it. The definition on the slide is one that I created myself. There are many different techniques that are able to fall under the category of somatics. Some of these include idiokinesis, Alexander technique, Feldenkrais technique, Rudolf Laban and Argar Batiniev's techniques, authentic movement, traditions from cultures like the Chinese, and more. Several of these techniques deal with alignment of the body. For example, Alexander technique was formed because an actor named Alexander suffered from chronic hoarseness when he performed. the actor discovered that his hoarseness was occurring because he had developed a bad alignment habit. Alexander Technique focuses on learning your everyday movement and patterns and works to make the movements more efficient and reduce any issues. Somatics is being brought into the dance world these days as kind of like the new trend. Somatics brings a holistic sense to dance movement therapy and techniques to use during sessions. Authentic movement is a technique that falls under the category of somatics. It's the movement practice we did at the beginning and have talked about a few times since. Mary Starks Whitehouse is the founder of authentic movement. She studied with Martha Graham in the States and Mary Wigman in Germany. These are both important figures in modern dance. While she was in Germany, she also studied at the C.G. Jung Institute, where she learned about the Jungian theory, or analytical theory. She began using dance in her sessions with psychiatric patients. Whitehouse says she began authentic movement when she realized, "I did not teach dance, I taught people." Authentic movement is one of the practices that is commonly used in dance therapy sessions. It is usually done with someone participating as the witness, which means that they are watching, not judging, and just noticing what the mover or movers are doing. In therapy sessions, the therapist would be the witness and would then interpret the client's movements. Neuroscience and the biological workings of the brain are the new biggest thing in dance movement therapy. There are several studies being done on how the brain works during therapy. The studies today do not talk about why dance movement therapy works in terms of psychological theories, like Freud and Jung, but rather in terms of the biology. One of the biological functions I find very interesting is a biofeedback loop. The main controller for the autonomic nervous system, which controls like the cardiovascular system, the organs and stuff, is the hypothalamus. The area that regulates emotions is the limbic system. The hypothalamus sends information to the limbic system and vice versa. This is why your emotions affect your body's functioning. For example, when you feel stressed, you can feel like you have a stomach ache. The limbic system is also in communication with the frontal lobe, which deals with cognition. The frontal lobe is used for things like meditation and other techniques that can be used to control the organs, like heart rate, to reduce your stress level. In a different study done on stress-related hormones in people with fibromyalgia, dance movement therapy was helpful. The use of participants with fibromyalgia was beneficial because their chronic pain makes them more susceptible to stress. The study looked at levels of cortisol, DHEAS, prolactin, and neuropeptide Y hormones. In a treatment group that did dance therapy and a control group that did not, those are the two groups. So cortisol is a hormone that increases with mental and physical activity and decreases during prolonged stress. In both the saliva and blood samples from the participants of both groups, the cortisol levels climbed higher for the treatment group. DHEAS is a hormone that reflects well-being. The treatment group's levels of DHEAS were higher than the control groups. Prolactin is a hormone that increases in situations of loss of power or in a crisis. The levels of prolactin increased more in the treatment group. Neuropeptide Y is a hormone used in perceiving pain, blood pressure, and weight. The treatment group had begun with lower levels of neuropeptide Y, but had higher levels by the end of the study. At the end of the study, the treatment group showed reduced pain during movement, increased mobility, and increased life energy. In a meta-analysis done on dance movement therapy, a study that looks at many other studies and compiles their conclusions together, it was found that dance movement therapy is effective for patients suffering from many different symptoms, especially anxiety. It was also found that adults and adolescents benefit more from dance movement therapy than children do. They concluded that more studies need to be done on dance movement therapy, and that better control groups and a standardized way of measuring needs to be used in studies to get stronger results. Now I will have my dancers perform the reworked version of my original piece. This new piece is called Contempo a la mode. I created this rework in a similar way to the first piece. Each dancer represents a different aspect of what dance movement therapy is today. One represents Jung's theory, another somatics, and the third the biological neuroscience aspects. I'm using Jung's ideas as contemporary because his ideas are so influential in modern-day authentic movement. His ideas have withstood the test of time in the dance movement therapy world. As you watch, keep this in mind and note the differences between this piece and the first piece. this year, I've concluded that there are several aspects integrated into dance movement therapy. It is a form of psychoanalysis pulling from psychological ideas from people like Freud and Jung. It uses dance practices and theories, somatics, movement analysis, and biological theories. All of these different approaches come together to create a therapy that can be used for just about anyone. It is all of these different areas coming together that interest me so much, and is why I want to continue learning more and more about dance movement therapy. Thank you all for coming and supporting me and for moving with me. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about dance movement therapy. Lemonade and stuff outside if you would like to stay and join me for that.
Wait, I have
Thanks, guys.
Can I ask you a question?
What?
Can I ask you a question?
Oh, questions! Oh, so close. Yes.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Yeah, so how would dance movement therapy work with someone who's had dance training and is more familiar with like controlling their movement in their body?
Right, yeah. So it's more about how the person moves personally rather than like, so you can have all the ballet technique in the world, but you're still going to dance differently than somebody else who's had all the ballet technique in the world. So it's more based on things like the kinespheres and the movement analysis kind of stuff. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question about like the process. When you're talking about the framework and the idea of kind of the diagnosis or figuring out their individual movement and then working through that to kind of increase the range of movement.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that is a kind of a dialogue between the patient and the therapist? Like, are they talking and discussing the movements throughout, or is it more just pure movement on the part of the patient?
Yeah, so there is discussion. Like with authentic movement, there would be the therapist watching the movements and then kind of discussing afterwards what they saw, what they didn't see, what they could see, kind of stuff. Yes, there is talk between the therapist and patient. Yeah. Yes.
Does it end up being a lot of group sessions then, or is it solo sessions, or can you kind of do both?
Either one works. Yeah. Yep. Kind of depends on what the patient wants. Yeah. Auntie Sue?
Yes, please. Do you have an idea of the target population you want to work with, and if so, does that steer you or affect your graduate study?
Yeah, it does. So that's why I'm not going to grad school right away, because I'm not entirely sure what population I want to work with yet. Right now, I'm thinking more of the children, adolescent area, and probably working with like anxiety disorders. But I'm going to take the year or two and figure that out. And then, yeah, the different grad schools for dance therapy kind of take different approaches and put you into different fields when you're there, so it will depend on what I decide to do on which grad school would best fit me. Yeah. Yes.
I was curious how exactly dance therapy fits into like the overall treatment process. So if it's going to be the main component, or in addition to medication, or more traditional therapy, just how that works.
Yeah, so it's going to be pretty personal based on the person. So like any therapy, it probably will work better if there's medication combined with it, but it depends on if the patient actually wants medication, or like if they don't, that's fine, but they can also do a combination. But yeah, I think it would be kind of, instead of like cognitive behavioral therapy stuff or something along that line. Oh yeah. Anything else? Should we go eat cake? Oh, here.
How closely does the therapist work with the medical person involved, the doctor?
So like Susan McKenna was talking about, I think it's pretty close. You kind of work as a team, but it also is going to depend on what population you're working with and what kind of like institute you're working in. So if you're working in a hospital, you're more likely to work with a team. There are people who do private practice for dance therapy, so then it's basically just going to be you. but it just kind of depends on what area, where you are. Yeah.
Are there certain patients that would work better with cognitive behavioral therapy versus dance therapy, or
Yeah,
is there a lot of
probably.
crossover?
I think it's gonna have to deal a lot with the personality of the person, because like some people are not gonna take to going into therapy and being forced to move a lot, so then something else would be better for them. But, yeah.
Anything else?
I was curious, this presentation looks like your research focused almost exclusively on the psychological portions of dance therapy. And I was wondering if you've done any research or have looked into what the connections are with dance as a psychological therapy versus dance as a physical therapy.
Yeah, so I did do mostly psychological just because that's what I'm personally interested in. So I didn't really do much of the physical, but there were studies done where it does help with people with disabilities who have like muscular disability kind of stuff, and it helps them increase their range of movement and stuff.
Because
So
I
I
was
did.
just curious because it's for people perhaps with this physical injury, and that can also be a psychological.
It could be, yeah.
It could be a stressor or a source of trauma or such. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there are considerations on how to blend into do a mixed practice.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something about that. I didn't really go into that area though. That's a good question. Yes.
Is your dancing therapeutic? Do you
My
find
dancing personally?
therapy within your dancing?
Somewhat, yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's got a lot of the same, dance has a lot of the same like relaxation techniques that are used in different therapies. So it just kind of has a built-in therapeutic aspect